Good afternoon. My name is Stephen O'Malley and I'm representing a company called Civic Engineers. We're interested in the complete picture from an engineering perspective. So we cover structures, urban design, urban regeneration, and we're interested in the alignment, orientation, the position of how our cities and towns work. And we represent this in complete streets, understanding the dynamics of streets and how they might contribute to the lifestyles that we're interested in. In this example here, this is from Stockwell in South London, and these are images of the before and after of Van Gogh Walk in Stockwell, and you can see in the top image here how conventional and ordinary the street has been laid out, occupied in the usual fashion by vehicles and car parking and so on, and in the lower picture it was far more versatile. But we need to go back to the 1950s to have a think about the strategic decisions that were made at that point that then subsequently informed all sorts of more recent urban design, street highway engineering design. And here's Ernest Marples, the then Minister for Transport in the Tory government at that point, who commissioned the Beeching report and also the Buchanan report. And from the 1950s, having decided to invest in motorways and highways and car infrastructure, there was then a sharp decline in the more conventional or more predictable pedestrian cycling, and the advent of highway engineering, which sort of emerged in the 1970s. And you can see there that the safety statistics and the segregation of traffic and pedestrians became very important. And a lot was lost in that transition, where all cultural life that had previously taken place on our streets was eradicated by virtue of the highway engineering that then overwhelmed it and supersumed it. That was underpinned by our culture at the time, heavily informed by mass advertising schemes like this One False Move and You're Dead campaign that ran during that time, embedded in all of our DNA, our psyche, about the concern and anxiety about mixing pedestrians and traffic, and the dominance that traffic then took in our lifestyles and our streets. This diagram here is showing what then happened to our lifestyles, where we started to warehouse different parts of our lives into different spaces. The retail park for our retail, the business park for our business, meaning that the only sensible way to get from one of these spaces to the other was to drive. And that then affected the geography, the landscape, and the allocation of our streets within those spaces, where traffic became the calling card or the symptom that we now are all confronted with, and the lack of actual freedom that we were meant to achieve with the arrival by car, this perceived freedom that we were supposedly offered. This illustration here, I think, is a very good example of the lack of democracy in the spaces. Here we have 23 cars, largely single occupier vehicles, to the 51 cyclists that are on the top side of the image. This lack of intensity in our streets, which is dominated by vehicles, meaning that we end up getting squashed to the margins. These three examples here are from, could be typical of any street within the UK, heavily segregated with railings and barriers, but also this ridiculous design by methodology where you've got a bus stop with a cycle rack that runs around the back of it. And this diagram here, I think, is really interesting in terms of trying to offer a very quick graphic illustration of the journey that we've been on, where vehicles have got this dominant route through, and pedestrians and cyclists and other forms of transport have this fragmented, awkward, convoluted access to our landscape. It's not our institutions as engineers that have driven us into this position or have forced us to make these types of decisions. In fact, both the Institute of Civil Engineers and the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transport both talk about the balance between science and creativity and artistry and imagination in the role that engineers need to play in how we design our spaces and our city streets. The Institute of Highways and Transport published this document in 2007 and followed up in 2011, Manual for Streets, which starts to afford a much more progressive benchmark for how the conversation begins in the allocation of the spaces within our streets, and a far more democratic approach, tightening up on the geometry that's made available for vehicles. In this instance here, we've got a very basic precast concrete flood alleviation channel that runs across the landscape to the detriment of everything else. So this water space, with all its potential, is actually completely disconnected from the environment that it passes through. No opportunity to engage with it as a local community or as a place. And here is a watercourse that has the same functionality and yet offers much greater diversity in terms of its use and its application. Very simple things. I think that the difficulty that we have is this very binary approach, this very simple approach, where it's one function or another, when in actual fact, what we need when we're investing in our infrastructure is a far more sophisticated approach. Here's some exceptionally good examples of current best practice. This is a scheme at St Leonard's Circus in Shoreditch, and you can see this is the scheme as was, heavily engineered and detached from the pedestrian environment, where with some very brave interventions and the space moderated and controlled by trees, offering the same functionality but offering a much higher degree of amenity. This is New Road in Brighton. This scheme has actually been constructed since 2007, a scheme that we were involved in. And as you can see, conventional streetscape before, with the application of a very straightforward approach, offering a high degree of versatility and simplicity. It offered the town something that the city didn't have before, which was a public space. This is a scheme, bit of a watershed scheme, and again we were involved in this scheme in Poynton. 27,000 vehicles a day travel through this rather conventional looking junction before. This was constructed in September 2012, and this is the scheme in its conception, and that was a picture of the scheme in its delivery, still dealing with the same quantity of traffic. Another scheme here in Hackbridge, which we've been involved with in Sutton, 19,000 vehicles a day traverse this rather beleaguered little settlement. What we undertook was a detailed analysis, reduced the amount of highway space by over 50%, which made the space available for other things. And this scheme here is one in Altrincham in South Manchester. And as you can see in the top image, a massive junction, completely disconnected from its environment and its landscape. And as a concept proposal, what we're showing here on this bottom illustration is a complete reversal of the allocation of that space, minimizing the amount of geometry and space available for vehicles to afford great opportunity for pedestrians in the locality. Thank you very much. Thank you.